chapter 6 of Theologico-Political Treatise by Baruch Spinoza is about miracles. It titles it Of Miracles. This is a very interesting chapter because it covers one of those aspects of religion that some people consider very important. And in fact, there are people whose entire belief in whatever religion they believe in is based on miracles. And some will even choose to listen to whatever teacher they want to listen to based on whether those teachers or prophets have done any miracle. So it's a very important chapter. It's also very insightful. So he says, he talks about miracles in a way that he tries to make it not as important, or make the reader see how miracles are not that important, number one. And number two, to see how it's possible that they are not really miracles as we think they are, or you might think they are. It says, for the masses think that the power and providence of God are mostly clearly displayed by the events that are extraordinary. Now, in another video, I didn't mention that it doesn't make sense when we think about it carefully, why we will think that it is through extraordinary events that God's power can be displayed. And that's what he tries to illustrate in this chapter, that why do we think that it's when things happen outside of the ordinary, that's when God's power is displayed. He says, in fact, it should be the opposite round. We should appreciate God's power when things are going the way they should be going. And I'm going to explain that more. They suppose, forsooth, that God is inactive so long as nature works in a custom order. There are many people who, when nature is working the way it's supposed to be working, it's like there's this assumption that God is inactive. And God becomes active when now things go against nature. Yeah. Then we say, oh, now God is active, or there is that assumption that that's when God is active. Thus they imagine two powers distinct from the other, the power of God and the power of nature. Now, when people believe that it is through miracles that God's power is displayed, it's like there's this assumption that maybe they don't think about, they don't even think about, and that's the assumption that when you think like that, it's like you are assuming there is God and then there is nature. While, and even Baruch continues to say, the power of God and the power of, though the latter is in sense determined by God. So there is this argument that nature itself is a creation of God. But then it's like we want to assume that then when something goes against nature, then that's when it is God. And when things are going the way they are supposed to be going, it's like God is inactive. So those are the things he tries to illustrate in this chapter. Now, he has like 5 points that he goes through. So point number 1, he says, nature cannot be contravened. There is nothing that happens in nature that is going against nature. And everything that happens in nature is part of nature, and is part of is how things need to work. What happens is our ignorance of nature makes us see some things that happen in nature as extraordinary. He says that's one. One is we are ignorant. We are ignorant, and because we are ignorant, when something happens that we've never seen before, then we think it's outside nature. And he says often that's not the case. It's within nature, but it's just that we are unaware of it, or we've never experienced it. And he says sometimes these things have happened in the past, but nobody kept a record of it for us to see. And in fact, he says most people are ignorant anyway. So, or most people are not knowledgeable enough to know of some of these things. So when something happens they don't understand, they think it's going against nature. That's one. Two, he says when you look at miracles that are recorded, often there are two things going on. One thing is the person who recorded it used a language that when you read, you can so easily make the mistake of thinking that whatever they are describing actually happened that way. And often that is not the case. Often the things happened in a natural way, but they use a language that is kind of poetic, and it comes across like things happen. Because he gives an example of the verses that talk of, I think it's in Isaiah or somewhere, I'm forgetting which book, where there is a talk of when the kingdom of Babylon will fall, the stars will fall from the ground, from the sky, and blah, blah, blah. But when you read it, you realize this was hyperbole language. And it was supposed to say, oh, it will be a very difficult time for that kingdom. But now when you read, you think that's what will actually happen. So he says that's one thing that is happening. Another thing that is happening is the reporting that happens over time kind of messes up the actual thing that happened. And then there is this tendency of humans to be attracted to things that are extraordinary, and sometimes the people who are reporting go so much into their own imaginations, and they create these narratives, and then you read 1,000 years later, and you get the wrong understanding of what actually happened. What actually happened was in line with nature, but the reporting itself makes it sound like it's completely out of nature. So that's what Baruch says about what miracles are. And he says there's nothing like something happening that contravenes nature. What happens is either we are ignorant, it's part of nature and we are ignorant of it, we've never seen it before, even though maybe it's happened before, or the language used to describe it is kind of like hyperbolic or done in such a way that we might get wrong impression about it, or the reporting itself changes the nature of the event itself. So he says a miracle is an event which causes cannot be explained by the natural reason through the reference to the ascertained working of nature. But since miracles were wrought according to the understanding of the masses, who are wholly ignorant of the working of nature. Okay, so point number 2, that God's nature and existence, consequently his prophet, cannot be known from miracles, that they can all be much better perceived from fixed and immutable nature. This is a very important point personally, because I've had a long journey with religion in my life, and the one argument that I find so persuasive about the existence of God is looking at how nature works, how everything is so planned and organized. Sometimes I look at nature and I'm like, I'm seeing algorithms, how plants are growing, how animals reproduce, how animals learn to do things, all these things. And I'm looking at them and I'm like, this is so amazing. There must be an intelligence out there that organized all this. I find that to be the most persuasive argument for the existence of God. And that's what Baruch, in fact, says, that the most persuasive argument that there is a God who exists is the immutable order of nature. If we look at it, we can argue there is God. Arguing that miracles are the ones that prove that there is a God, in fact, is like contrary, especially for somebody who's trying to find reason to reach God. It becomes very problematic, and he says that's not the best way to explain the existence of God. And I found myself so much agreeing with him on that point. Yes, that we can, it's the most powerful argument we can make about the existence of God is just looking at nature, how it functions, how things are happening in nature. The things we take for the things that happen day to day that we take for granted. And in fact, he says human nature is in that the things we see every day, we kind of ignore them. We don't realize how powerful they are. And so we go seeking for these rarities, these things that the one thing that happens once in a while is the one that captures our attention, and now we think, oh, that's how we can prove that God exists. But we forget to look at these things that are happening, the way your body is functioning at the moment, right now, how you breathe, how your heart beats, how the blood flows, and all these things. And those, if you think about them carefully, they give you a much better argument about the existence of God. He also makes an argument, point 3, about that the Bible doesn't actually make any arguments about miracles that go against the nature. And he goes into looking at different verses. I wouldn't say that his argument on that point is very strong, but yeah, it's very good. It's good. He tries to go into different verses trying to show us that the Bible doesn't actually make arguments about miracles that contravene nature. So yeah, and then the last point is trying to tell us about being careful. Again, just like with prophecy, with the miracles that are mentioned in the Bible, for us to be very careful with the language that is used, because if we are not careful, we don't take into consideration the context and the type of language and how people saw things when the Bible was being written, then we end up so much misinterpreting whatever they say, and that includes the miracles.